Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Aileen Delan, and I'm the co-director of the Centre for the Study of Popular Music and Popular Culture and an ethnomusicologist based in the Irish World Academy. There's two parts to our event today. We're going to have a book launch, and then we're going to have short presentations by three colleagues where we'll talk about the importance of studying protest song. So to start the launch, I'm going to hand you over to the Dean of KBS, Finbar Murphy, who's going to talk about a book our colleagues from sociology are launching today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Aileen, and good morning, everyone. My name is Finbar Murphy. I'm Dean of the Kemmy Business School, and honestly, I'm genuinely honoured and, dare I say, touched as well to be asked to say a few opening remarks this morning. This book is a culmination of work undertaken by Maya, Martin and Owen from the Centre of the Study of Popular Culture at UL. All three have already published widely in this area, certainly in the fields of media representation, of food poverty and social welfare fraud. I'm also really thrilled to see the collaboration between AHSS and KBS, and it really does showcase the degree of expertise within UL in the area of the sociology of media, journalism and sociolinguistics. There are also many other UL contributors, including Cindy Joyce, Catherine Hayes, Fergal Quinn, Elaine Vaughan, Audrey Galvin, Henry Silk and Mufida Ben Musa. I'm going to depart a little bit from my script for a moment and talk a little bit about the KBS, but there is a good reason for it. The KBS Kemmy Business School is called after Jim Kemmy. He was a really unusual politician. He was a Limerick man, he was a socialist, he was an atheist. He challenged the Catholic Church, he challenged Irish nationalism, he even challenged his own political parties at times, but he did that from a principled point of view. He was particularly interested in social development, inequality of opportunity and equality in general. There is no contradiction between the business school being called after such an individual, and quite the contrary, we're exceptionally proud of Jim Kemmy's name and what it means to us, and it's something that we reiterate very frequently internally. Least you think that a business school is about shareholder value. I think the collaboration between Maya and Martin and Owen shows that the business school is very much about social good. So President Kilcummins often talks about the social good of a university. And I think this book really exemplifies how we as a community contribute to social good. Two things I want to touch on. One is in general inequality and what that means. Now I'm going to be a little bit nerdy and talk about it from an economic or financial perspective. And in case there's any economists in the room, I'm not an economist, I'm more in the finance area. But, you know, inequality, it leads to lower economic growth. And that's not me saying that, that's the IMF, OECD and the World Bank. That is well established. There's some debate about the extent of inequality, but that is an established fact. The other point I want to make is the correlation or the inverse correlation between the Gini index and the happiness indices. Again, this is a contested area, but there's clear correlation between inequality, particularly in extreme inequality, and happiness indices. And, you know, there's good reason for that. I kind of, for me personally, I equate equality to a sense of community, a sense of togetherness, a sense of pride in a community like the University of Limerick or in the location that I work in. So, you know, I can translate that into those type of personal feelings. What I see then in this book is a really great example of how our research and our collaboration highlight some really important areas. When we talk about happiness indices and all that sort of things, they are moderated by trust in institutions, particularly state institutions, the rule of law, universities, but they're also based on media and the trust of media, media being a very important social institution. And when I look at the chapters and the contributions by the community here and indeed international scholars, what jumps out, for example, media representations of Irish travellers, or I possibly should say misrepresentations, also inward immigration, Syrian immigration, and how that's portrayed in Irish media. And then if you look at the impact of the contributions in a global sense, everything from the representation of poverty and poor in South Africa, soap operas, Hindi cinema, and so on. It's really global reach, this particular book, and it's an amazing achievement by the editors and contributors. Critical explorations of media and inequality. This book examines then how media systems reproduce and legitimize unequal social structures by marginalizing, sensationalizing, or blaming those most affected by poverty. This book, of course, is of interest to students and scholars, but it should also be of interest to NGOs, by regulators, and by policymakers as well. I hope that the book will have further impact, and it'll be taken up equally as well by practitioners in the media industry. Maya, Martin and Owen have published this collection with Bloomsbury, New York, which is a very prestigious publisher, and they are to be commended for showcasing UL's expertise to the wider world. It is really fitting that this book is launched on Research Week, and I want to congratulate the three editors and, of course, the Centre for the Study of Popular Music and Popular Culture at UL for a really significant and important achievement. Thank you so much. And thank you also for my signed copy.
Thank you, Finbar. Let me give you some context before I introduce you to our speakers. In 2015, we held a conference here in UL, Songs of Social Protest, and out of this book was published in 2018. And we had speakers from all over the world doing really excellent work on the efficacy of protest song. But it was pre-Donald Trump's first term, it was pre the war in Ukraine, it was pre the particular iteration of what was happening in Palestine, and of course what's happening in Iraq and many other places in the world as well. And so we've been, since then, recognising that the study of protest song has really important implications for all kinds of research. And in the last 2 years, we received some seed funding as a priority research centre to develop a network, basically, of protest academics and researchers with the intention of really giving space and developing research funding in order to enable young researchers, in particular at the doctoral, postdoctoral and early career level, to engage in a form of research that's not always actually promoted or supported in different countries. And it's also something that we want to continue developing and looking forward to doing funding bids with our colleagues. Why song? Finbar was there talking about the importance of media, but of course song was one of the first mediums, and it's one of those things that, besides indicating in textual form what's happening in the world or how we commemorate or how we should fight or resist or push against things, it also does it in embodied form as well, because music itself can sometimes bypass cognition and go straight into your body and cause you to feel unity and wanting to participate or to arouse the emotions. So it's a very, very sophisticated technology, and it finds different manifestations in different countries. And I think the other thing we think about in relation to song is that we talk about genre a lot, and there are some genres that lend themselves more towards protest song, for example, rap and hip hop, certain types of folk song. But the thing about music is that it's quite porous, and it can accrue meaning depending on the context in which you find it. We've looked at songs from Denisov's model, which is the idea of songs that cause you to unite. They're sort of manifest songs, and other songs that are more about telling a story to make you change your mind. But there's a whole range of these kinds of songs and, of course, musics that do this kind of labour. So today, we have 3 speakers who are going to take a slide each to illustrate to you some of their thoughts around these ideas in relation to their own research and their own work. So I'm going to invite Felix and Martin to take a seat up here while I introduce you. I'll introduce Martin first because he's my co-conspirator. Dr. Martin Powers, co-director of the Centre for the Study of Popular Music and Popular Culture, and he's also currently the head of the Department of Sociology. And Martin and I have co-edited, along with Professor Owen Devereux, many books, special editions on protest song, journals and articles, and various funding bids as well. So this is Martin here on the right, if you don't know him already. Up on screen in the middle, we're joined by Dr. Stephen Miller. Stephen is based in Queen's University, Belfast, and was unable to travel, but we're very glad he is able to be online with us today. Stephen is a lecturer in anthropology and in ethnomusicology. And actually, Stephen was here for a while with us as a former Leverhulme postdoc. So we really believe in the rhizomatic networks that we establish, and people keep coming and going, and that's exactly how we like it. So Stephen focuses on music, power and conflict, particularly in the context of Britain and Ireland. And he uses music as a platform to examine pressing concerns, including militant nationalism, social inclusion and the legacy of colonialism. And he has 2 absolutely excellent books from University of Michigan Press in 2020, Sounding Dissent, Rebel Songs, Resistance and Irish Republicanism, and hot off the press from Oxford University Press 2026, Performing Paramilitarism, Loyalist Song, Conflict and the Cultural Wars in Northern Ireland. So Stephen, we will get to you shortly. Thank you for being here. And on my extreme left, your right, Dr. Felix Morgenstern, many times of this parish. Felix actually was an undergraduate in the Irish World Academy. He's an extraordinary piper. He's also an extraordinary researcher. He's currently an IRC postdoc. He's developing his monograph, which is pretty much in proof stage now, Felix. And he will be launching that monograph entitled Irish Traditional Musics in Germany, Nationalism, Nostalgia and Intercultural Transactions with Equinox Press. Felix also held a postdoc with the Austrian Research Council for 2 years at the University of Graz. He's many other interests besides Irish traditional music. He has secondary interests in popular music. He's a fan of Schlager. Don't tell anybody if any of you are fans of Schlager. And he's an ethnomusicologist who explores the interstices between folk and protest music, nationalism, cosmopolitanism, and the rise of populism in Europe. And he's working on a number of bids, including an early career ERC here with us in UL. So I think, Felix, we're going to start with you. As I say, each person will riff on their slide for a little while. We'll have a bit of a conversation, and ideally, hopefully we'll get some commentary and comments from you in the audience as well. So do you want to hop up here, Felix?
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this event. So I'm sort of talking about parts of my research that are kind of in the process of developing. So as Aileen mentioned, a lot of my recent interest has revolved around the rise of populism and the role of popular culture in circulating different imaginaries and different iterations of the nation globally. But it's of particular relevance in the European context, where we're seeing a rise in far-right populism across the board, and in particular where I'm based now in Austria, that's very much at the centre of public discourse and debate around that. So I want to talk to you about populism and my sort of approach to that research area, but I'm going to open with an example of an East German protest singer, singer-songwriter Wolf Biermann, who was quite prominent in the 1970s in particular, when he was actually expatriated from the GDR for voicing overt regime criticism in his songs. And so I just want to give you a sense of what he sang about, and you can follow the lyrics here on the screen as well, and then I'll kind of develop the idea of populism more broadly.
Manchen höre ich bitter sagen, Sozialismus schön und gut, aber was man uns hier aufsetzt, das ist der falsche Hut. Manche sehe ich Fäuste ballen in der tiefen Manteltage, kalte Kippen auf den Lippen und in den Herzen Asche. Wartest du auf bessere Zeiten, wartest du mit deinem Mut, gleich im Tor der Tag für Tag an des Flusses Ufer wartet, bis die Wasser abgeflossen, die doch ewig fließen.
So this is a very short excerpt opening my part of the presentation from Wolf Biermann here. And it's quite interesting because I deliberately translated the lyrics because it's actually not about the lyrics at all. It's about his performance style. And that brings us right into theories of populism and how that's actually performed more so than just existing on a discursive level. So Wolf Biermann's biography is quite interesting. He was brought up, he grew up in Hamburg, started singing, started learning how to play the guitar and performed quite widely, but then he actually moved to East Germany in the hopes of sort of fulfilling his socialist vision or kind of hoping for a fulfillment of his socialist dream. And this was very much something that the GDR, East Germany, promoted at the time as well. The interesting thing about Biermann is in the 1970s, in the mid-1970s, a growing sentiment of socialist disillusionment actually took sort of hold in public consciousness in East Germany, that what was propagated from the top down by state institutions wasn't actually fulfilled in everyday life. So he actually started writing and performing protest songs critiquing the East German government, and his songs were quite widely received and were, he's quite successful. And this particular performance was in Cologne in 1974, and in 1976 Biermann was actually expatriated from the GDR for precisely voicing overt regime criticism in his songs. So why am I talking about this particular example when we look at populism and the relation between populism and popular culture in Europe? Is that according to theorists such as Benjamin Moffat and following on from the work of André Düring and Kai Ginkel, populism can be understood as a kind of a dissatisfaction in the public consciousness with government institutions, with formal ideologies, and also something that where parties and populist parties, whether they are on the right or the left, identify with what they call the true people, or the genuine spirit of the people. Now that's up for debate what that actually means, but the interesting thing, what I want to focus on today, is that populism, according to Moffat, can be understood as a performative style. So it's not solely about the lyrics of what you're reading here, that it's about a socialist dream that didn't actually get fulfilled, and it's about people actually clenching their fists and being really dissatisfied with the government. But it's also about the particular performance style, how Biermann actually delivers these songs. It's about the particular grain in his voice, the sort of the way he voices that dissatisfaction, and the musical interpretation of that as well. And that's precisely why we focus on popular music and music making, musicking more generally when it comes to politics in popular music and song. Because music, as Aileen mentioned earlier, is something that can bypass cognition, go straight into something deeply embodied. So these songs, apart from what is actually overtly stated in the lyrics, they go into something, straight into something that moves listeners in a particular way. And when Biermann performed in West Germany after his expatriation from the GDR, you see some of those recordings. I would really encourage you to look up some of these recordings, that you hear the audience clapping when he's performing, and that's because of his enthusiasm when he's actually performing. So populism and its relationship with popular culture, that doesn't just exist at a discursive level or at the level of state institutions and ideologies, but it's actually something that is actively performed, and that depends or that relies on what André Düring refers to as situational arrangements. So it's not just about performers speaking to an audience, but it's actually how they situate their performance, how the room is set up, how they're able to convey their message of protest to a broader public. So the interesting thing about populism is that it can sort of be adapted from both ends of the political spectrum. What makes it so powerful is that actually populism is always about some degree of dissatisfaction between political elites, and also tries to speak to what populist rhetoric identifies as the true people, or the actual people in a particular locale. That is, protest is directed against government elites or elites that are often framed as corrupt. So in Biermann's case, that critique was very deliberately framed against the socialist government in East Germany. You know, that socialist utopia wasn't actually fulfilled, and that people were trying to leave East Germany, but they couldn't because freedom of travel just didn't happen at the time. And then on the other end of the spectrum right now, we're seeing in Central Europe in particular a rise in anti-immigrant rhetoric. So the rhetoric of far-right nationalist and far-right populist parties is mostly directed against the rise of immigration in Europe and refugees coming to Europe as well in search of a new home. And then their populism is actually directed against those groups of people who are trying to find a new place to live, and it's identifying with what populist rhetoric calls the true people, or the true people of the nation, and what that means. But it's interesting, and that's why I put Biermann up here, to make you understand, or to sort of convey the idea that populism is not something that's just on an ideological level, but it's actually performed, it's actively enacted, and that's precisely why looking at music, song, and popular culture is so important when we talk about these issues. And that's precisely why I think it's great that we're having this event. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Felix cited André Düring there in his presentation, and actually he was a colleague of Felix's in Graz when Felix was a postdoc there, and André was one of the people we brought over as part of the network, and he's done some amazing work on conceiving of music as political music, politicized music, and assembles politicity. So he helps us think critically about the ways in which music can behave. So André was one. We also had Melanie Schiller from Radboud University, who's working on farmers and far-right music. We had Gabe Rayleigh from Monash in Australia, who's working on Iranian music. And David MacDonald, who's working on Palestinian hip-hop, and who actually was fired from his university for a while for that very thing. So thank you very much, Felix. We have I've taken some notes, and there are lots of things I'm sure your co-presenters would like to speak with you about. So we're going to turn now to Stephen. Stephen, are you there? Yeah, so we have your slide, and I'll just put it up there for a minute, and then I'll take the slide down so that people can see you. So please do go ahead.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Aileen, and it's a genuine pleasure to be with you, albeit virtually. I was genuinely looking forward to coming down to Limerick, where, as you say, I was based for a year between 2016 and 2017. But I've developed a tremendous pain in my back, which is why I'm standing up, sort of looming large over everyone, as you'll see on the screen just now. I guess I've had the great pleasure of not only working with Aileen and Martin, but also publishing with them as well in different contexts. So Aileen, you and I appear in Made in Ireland, which I'm holding just now. So we're together in text, and Martin and myself and James Carr also co-edited a series of books about football, politics and popular culture, which to some of you perhaps might seem unrelated to what we're doing, but there were many interconnections between music and protest and sound in those books. So again, it's a genuine pleasure to be with you all today. I'm going to talk a little bit about my first book that I published. It's called Sounding Dissent, Rebel Songs, Resistance and Irish Republicanism. But as Aileen said, I've also just published another book. In fact, it's so new, I don't actually have the physical copy, so I can't even hold it up in front of you just now. But those two books, as much as they deal with political positions that are either side of the spectrum, there's actually a lot of commonality in terms of how they perceive of what they're doing as protest through music and through sound. So the first book, Sounding Dissent, and was really what animated me there was to look at how Republicans had used music and song as a way to resist against the hegemonic power of the British state from the late 18th century up to the present. So it was a combination of historical archival work and then more of a focus on the contemporary ethnographic scene, particularly in Belfast and in around Belfast. And I was interested in how Republicans use and have used music to do this, to push back, as Aileen said, against this sort of larger power, and how they did it through music and through song, and some of the interconnections between physical violence and this sort of broader sort of cultural scene. So what you'll find is that if you go right back to the late 18th century with the United Irishmen, figures like Theobald Wolfe Tone, for example, played the flute, wrote songs, and this meshing or merging of music and resistance continues right from those early stages with the United Irishmen, right through the 19th century up through into the 20th century with people like James Connolly, Patrick Pearse. These people both wrote songs and performed them, as well as being active participants in the Rising, and then subsequently into the Troubles, where you had figures like Bobby Sands, prominent IRA figure, who again was involved in writing songs, creating music when he was interned. So the connection here, I suppose, to put a sort of theoretical slant on it, figures, sociologists like Irving Goffman would sort of point to the need for us to go backstage, if you like. So to use this sort of dramaturgical analogy, I'm interested in what happens behind the scenes, backstage, or as the anthropologist James C. Scott talks about, he calls it offstage. Again, this notion, this idea is that by studying the culture, the songs, the poetry of the oppressed, we can get a greater insight into what motivates them, what animates them politically and culturally. And again, that sort of slides into my second book, Performing Paramilitarism, Loyalist Songs, Conflict and Culture War in Northern Ireland, which again looks at the other side of the coin, so to speak, through Loyalist songs. But what really animated that book is Johan Galtong's notion of cultural violence. So during the Troubles, Loyalists were busy writing songs, some of whom were very prominent members of Loyalist paramilitary organisations, people like Gusty Spence, who was the sort of founder of the modern day UVF, who was writing songs, writing poetry and financing musicians to come through and sort of tell a story. So this idea about cultural violence is how music, how songs, how other elements of culture can help set the scene, so that when acts of physical violence do happen, the population is already desensitized, if you like, to committing these acts of violence against people. So again, that's what that second book looks at, how Loyalist songs sort of figure within that, and the connection between, as I say, cultural and physical violence. The slides on the screen that I put up, in a sense, bring us up to the present, and indeed things that happened since my book was published, and which I think put an interesting spin on what we mean by protest songs and how protest songs operate within society. So both Republicans and Loyalists would see the songs that they produce and use as protest songs of some type. what becomes interesting is when things on the ground are such that the rest of the population don't see things that way, or that there's been some political switch, which means that, which sets up whether we can call these protest songs anymore. And that's something I'm interested in talking to people about, and sort of gathering data on. So this idea that Northern Ireland was set up, gerrymandered over 100 years ago to create a Protestant state for a Protestant people. Well, as the slide shows you, the latest census now shows that for the first time in history, Catholics and nationalists form the sort of largest grouping within that society. So if rebel songs or protest songs that protest against those, the majority, if you like, how does that change once the demographics on the ground change? Can they still be called protest songs? Can they still be called rebel songs? Does it change them ontologically when the setup of the state is different? When you have people within a group that were shot at, killed, maligned, are now heading up this state, or as some would say, administering British rule in Northern Ireland. Does that change the notion of what protest is, what resistance is within this context? So I'm interested in that. And again, I'm interested in these sort of newer forms of resistance music that have emerged here in the north, like Kneecap being the sort of key example. So I wouldn't group Kneecap within that wider rebel song tradition. To me, that starts in the late 1800s and it ends in the end of the 20th century with the Good Friday Agreement. And I'm happy to talk about why I would bracket it off like that. But groups like that sort of challenge this sort of binary, particularly when you speak to some of the people that go to these concerts, and they don't form, it's not just that they're from one particular community or one block. They transcend society. So I'm interested in how this changes the notion of protest here in the north, and whether that actually perhaps brings things more in keeping with protest songs more generally, where you have things that are directed upwards instead of between different community camps or groups. And again, I suppose I'd be interested in this sort of commodification of protest and rebellion, like the headline of the event suggests, from that Billy Bragg song, and this idea of like wearing T-shirts, so when you see young people wearing Clash T-shirts or maybe even Billy Bragg T-shirts, what does that mean now? Now that the politics in the ground have shifted, it was edgy, it was political, it meant something different to be a Clash fan during the 70s and going to rock against racism and all these things than it does today. So in what ways is protest bracketed off and commodified, and in what ways does that actually stop the revolution from being realised? So these are some of the things that are animating me at the moment, animating my research, and I'm looking forward to talking across our speakers this morning to hear about what they're doing.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I mean, it's interesting because a lot of the thematic concerns in both examples so far are coming up, the kind of operating nostalgia, the way that nostalgia is mobilised and how that is used in particular ways, whether it's from a populist point of view, whether it's from an ethno-nationalist point of view. And actually, Martin is going to continue on some of these strands in relation to Kneecap and commodification and commercialisation, because when it comes to popular culture, we think that, for something to be authentic or real, it can't be mass mediated in any way, and of course that's simply not the case at all. Do you want to stand here, so he can hear you?
Yeah. So I'm not going to speak for very long at all, because I want you to have the opportunity to ask questions if you want. So I guess what I want to talk about just for a few minutes really is the so what bit. So why does any of this matter? Or does it really matter at all? Like, it might be of interest, but does it actually matter? And why should anyone be concerned about protest songs or that? And I guess this example shows why it does matter. The fact that the British state was willing to take a group of people who were singing and raising issues about a particular thing, that they were willing to charge them with supporting terrorism, a case which they had absolutely no chance of ever winning. Because how do you convict somebody for supporting terrorism, even if they had been wearing a T-shirt? Right, this is what the British state is now doing. It's convicting people of terrorist offences for wearing a T-shirt that has a particular slogan on it. Right? Why? Why did they do that? Right? If this stuff doesn't matter, then why are they willing to make themselves look foolish by taking cases, terrorism charges, which they have no chance of winning? And they're now doing it a second time, right? Why do they do that? They do that because protest songs actually do influence people, right? And they do make a difference. And that worries states, especially when they have essentially, again, Catherine and Fergal's session yesterday afternoon, you know, the way that the mainstream media in particular across the globe has become so compliant. You know, the Trump administration and their alternative facts, right? Just basically say whatever the hell you want. And most media organizations will just run with that, right? You know, the inclusion of, if you look at RTE and the way that they have reported on what has happened in Gaza, you know, the inclusion of little signifiers to tell us what to think about the story, the Hamas-run health ministry, right? Little slogans that are used all the time, which present the dominant way that we are supposed to understand whatever issue, right? These kinds of things and these kinds of groups, you know, what's his name, Bob Voilin, with his, you know, death to the IDF chant, same thing, right? So we're all about free speech, unless it's the kind of free speech that we don't particularly like. We're all about the right to protest. Protest is an essential part of democracy, but it has to be the right kind of protest, right? It's really protest that doesn't inconvenience the dominant class, right? That's fine. But anything outside of that, anything that challenges the dominant hegemonic understanding of how the world should be, that's very, very different. And the fact that the British state, which I guess has a long history of taking ridiculous court cases against Irish people anyway. Think the Birmingham 6 and the Guildford 4, for example, the Denning judgment that it's better for innocent people to go to jail than for the rule of law to be called into question. There's a whole ream of this kind of stuff, right? But this is just a really good example of why we look at these kinds of issues. Yes, they're of interest. Right? I'm particularly interested in lyrics of protest songs and the social context in which those lyrics are constructed and how that meaning can change over time. How, you know, how songs which were written 30, 40, 50 years ago are extremely relevant now because the social context has come back to the same situation happening again, right? So it's more, I'm not going to talk about kneecap or about anything to do with them really, it's just as an example to show how actually this stuff does matter. And it matters at a really high level. It matters at such a high level that a state is willing to try to shut these people up, right? Trump effectively banned them from going to America, right? Because you don't want people listening to what they're saying. And that's hugely important from a research perspective. We should be understanding why that's the case. So I'll shut up at that.
Thank you, Martin. Jacques Attali says in Noise, the political economy of music, that music doesn't reflect society, it actually predicts it. And in many ways, sometimes these activities can force certain kinds of changes. And that is why Trump wasn't very happy with Bad Bunny in the Super Bowl, because it presented another way of thinking and being in the world, with a particular vision around ecology and Hispanic culture that just did not sit with him. And I'm looking in the audience and I'm seeing some of the students here who've been doing extraordinary work actually on protest music as well. Myra working on ecologies of risk in Colombia, absolutely amazing work. Viola working on the ways in which we can analyse how people produce and engage with protest music as part of climate action and sustainability. So like this kind of research-led teaching is to the core of everything we're doing here, and it's really paying dividends. So how do we put these three in dialogue? And maybe we start by asking you if you have questions for them and they can respond equally. Even though we can't see you at the minute, Stephen, please just cough and interrupt if you wish. Yeah, does anybody, Stephen, Martin, Felix, or anyone in the audience, do any of you want to make a point about this or how you feel about it? The efficacy of protest. And Felix's argument, much as Martin is right that lyrics are critical because they give us contextual and important information and political information, so too is the ways that we embody this and we feel it and we listen to kind of that generational sounds that are part of who we are and maybe sometimes misconstrue them, but certainly feel them because that's what is often a call to action for people. Yeah, any questions? We're just going to bring you a microphone so that our speakers can hear. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I just wanted to add that in India, I think there's a long history of popular, songs as protests in public spaces, in villages, as street theater also. Mm-hmm. Even now, there's, I think, in Karnataka, there is a movement around one of the popular saints, as a protest to bring in their identity of a particular community. So it's great to see the work here.
And some of that work actually is in our original 2018 book, but we really embrace a multicultural and multi kind of dimensional approach to this because these movements and traditions are everywhere, actually, and mobilized very interestingly in current India. And we have a student from Bangladesh working on this, on the recent elections, and the role of media and the role of AI in generating protest songs, which were not. They were hegemonic songs, was extraordinary.
So politically, it would have been a part, because I was in Jawaharlal Nehru University in the 90s, and it would have been part of our own student protest movements. It was just part of who we were as students. Mm-hmm. So, I don't see it here, but it's great to see some work done.
I'm always trying to get them to protest here. One of the days I'll be successful. Stephen, did you want to interact in any way with Felix or with Martin? Or are there things you want to put out there that people might want to respond to in the audience too? Thank you for that.
Absolutely, yeah. There's lots of things I enjoyed these expositions. I was wondering, so there's obviously a long history of political songs being usurped or their artists being co-opted, and then the meanings subsequently being changed. There's the most famous example is Born in the USA. Bruce Springsteen writes this as a sort of protest type song, and it subsequently becomes adopted by President Reagan and his election team, and it's now seen as this sort of anthem for the US that means something really different than it started with. And it got me thinking about Felix's work on Bierman. And again, I'll be honest, I didn't really know who he was until you'd sent me your slides, and then I subsequently looked him up, and I got to know a little bit about his background. And I was just wondering, so from what I've read, he takes on a sort of Palestine critical position, if you like, and I wondered if that has had any effect or any bearing on his standing or position as a protest type singer. Obviously, the politics in Germany are different than they are in other places, but again, I'm just curious about if you don't fall into every camp in terms of okay, you're on the left, you support Palestine, you tick all these different boxes. Once you start to sort of disrupt that pattern, does that change how people perceive you, and indeed has it changed how people have perceived him?
Thanks, Stephen, for the question, and it's very critical. I mean, this whole Israel-Palestine debate in a German context is quite heated, and it continues to be heated. So because there's been a long pro-Israel stance just because of what happened during the Second World War and the Nazi regime as well, and the crime of genocide and a sort of reckoning with the past. But then in the current moment, we're seeing a lot of activism around pro-Palestine, and Interestingly enough, I haven't come across, with Biermann, I haven't come across any public sort of performances, because in Germany, for example, as well, there is legislation, pro-Palestinian protest songs being classed as illegal, or it actually being illegal to perform them publicly. So it's a kind of a difficult terrain to maneuver and to kind of tap into. And I think a lot of performers are actually taking a cautious route, and I haven't come across any particular German singer-songwriters who are overtly pro-Palestine, you know. So I would actually be curious, and I'd have to look into Biermann reception as well. So it's interesting to see, does that whole dynamic then change Biermann's performative persona, or the way he performs protest in that particular context? I'm not sure. I guess it would. I'm certainly sort of seeing a different form of censorship being enforced here, which is paradoxically so akin to the very censorship that he always critiqued in his own songs. And I think that censorship has to do with being vocal about pro-Palestinian stances in the public discourse in Germany in particular. There can be a lot of backlash, and there has been. So I think we're going to see a lot more of this in the public sphere emerging. But with Biermann, I'm not sure how you would, or if you would see him sort of perform pro-Palestine stances in the public.
It's interesting. There's two interventions I wanted to make here. One was, it's interesting you brought up Bruce Springsteen as well, because of course his song Minneapolis made such an important contribution. But of course, you know, he's safe, he can do those things. But we're also talking at a moment where we're entering the month of May, which is Eurovision season, and some people think that's just this camp, you know, whatever competition. That's not. That's where geopolitics plays out in extraordinarily profound and important ways, and the ways in which different state media are responding to that by cancelling or attending. These are core. But also, as you said, Felix, and you mentioned this too, Martin, you know, people whose livelihood is music, who don't have a basic income support, who have to navigate these things, these new laws that become enshrined right at the heart of Europe, that tension around free speech. You know, in many ways, we're resonating so much with a lot of what came up with in the journalism research presentation yesterday, for sure. Martin, did you want to come in on any of that?
No.
Okay. No, that's absolutely fine. I guess one of the things I also wanted to say in response to the importance of lyrics, with another student in the MA in ethnomusicology, Ellie, who I don't think is here. Ellie is looking at protest song around femicide in Greece, and one of the song forms that has translated into Greece has actually been the Nueve Canción from Latin America, and oftentimes singers will sing these songs in the original language, not understanding, but they have been porous enough to carry the grief and the meaning. And you're talking about, you know, a movement in the 1960s, pro-democracy, socialism. It starts to accrue and gather momentum. And so these songs embody histories of protest that sometimes translate completely, not at the textual level, but at the somatic level as well. Any other? Yeah. Yes, Owen.
Across what you've all talked about.
Or can you hold so that Stephen can hear if we just give you the microphone? Thank you.
Thanks, Eileen. Across what you've all talked about, where is the reception analysis dimension in this? So you can talk about songs having a power of a whole variety of ways, politically and politically and so on. But in one sense, it's like the old argument about media effect. Unless you engage with pretty significant numbers of audiences, people, and they look at their pre-existing ideological positions, and to think then about, well, you know,
a track will influence a certain group, it won't influence another, it will mobilise. So I'm just wondering where that is in this debate.
I think that's very much central, and it speaks to the importance of transdisciplinary and multidisciplinary approaches, because in my own discipline of ethnomusicology, we were very focused on the ethnographic, on the producers, on the kind of on-the-ground experience, but media analysis and discourse, it's much more it can be obviously at the qualitative, but at the quantitative level as well, and that's why I guess in a week like this is why it's so important that as we move forward, thinking about European bids and beyond that you're not just having the qualitative or the quantitative, you're having the statisticians, you're having the people who can really bring these things together in a multidimensional way to do precisely that, because as you say, yeah, singular effect on a body or on a community, you can speak to those things in a particular way, but a polity, an assembled policity, those are the places we go with this. So this is why we can have many, many researchers from many different disciplinary backgrounds bringing them all together. So it's a great question.
I agree, but I guess my slide should have already answered your question, because the British state isn't going to do this unless they already buy into the idea that it does have an effect, and it's a very strong effect, because otherwise they just let them rabbit on. Why would they care? So they know it. I guess what we need to do is we need to be able to document exactly what you said, which is which groups does it affect and whatever. Yeah. But the overarching thing is I think we're safe enough in accepting that it does have an effect, otherwise they wouldn't bother.
Go ahead, please.
Just jump in on that, because it's very, very interesting point, and it's also speaking to our methodological frameworks as researchers working in these scenarios, because the other month we had Andre Doering from Graz he did a workshop on musicological group analysis, so actually looking at the reception of songs and effective audience responses to these song materials. So, and I think this is where we have to sort of, at least in ethnomusicology and related social sciences disciplines, we maybe have to play catch up at some point and integrate these more, because that's a very valid point. You know, to somehow figure out how to document, how to score the range of responses. You know, because these are culturally situated, of course, and ethnography is just one way of getting an insight. You know.
Yeah. Thanks, Felix. Stephen, did you want to come in there, or?
I missed the. I heard the word reception and then a couple of other words, but it was sort of a bit bumpy, so I didn't hear the entirety of the question. Could you sort of surmise it for me?
Basically, you know, when we're talking about embodiment or the effect that music can have on persons or on groups or on ethnic groups, or what about something larger? What about the broader discourse having effects on populations, and what kind of methods might we use to garner that? And we were talking about the nature of interdisciplinarity, that we all work to our strengths and maybe do collaborative projects in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with all that. I mean, so in one of the pictures on the slide that I used was from the Wolf Tones gig at Electric Picnic, which was the biggest audience they'd ever had at that second biggest venue within Electric Picnic in the tent. And then, as you'll all, or many of you will know, there was a huge furore in the Irish media afterwards, where they were saying, you know, these young people are all singing these songs and they don't understand the complexities of the Troubles and whatnot. And again, the demographic wise, it was young people who were showing up to hear these octogenarians sing about Irish rebel songs. So I think, as you've mentioned, it's important to pull people together from different disciplines, but also to ask people on the ground and say, why were you going to that? What was it that animated you to go and see these old men performing antiquated old songs about Irish resistance? Is there something about that chimes with you in your current position, where it feels like the Irish state has not looked after young people? They can't get on the housing ladder, and there's a lack of opportunities and whatnot. Is that what they're using these songs to protest against? Is it the fact that they're being told not to sing these songs? So There was another slide that I'd used. So when the Irish women's football team had beaten the Scottish women's football team, they were chanting "ooh ah, the rah" in the changing rooms. This was recorded, and then rather than the media celebrating these young women who'd made this tremendous victory, they were hounded over the appropriateness or not of using these chants. So is it just a sort of knee-jerk reaction to being told what to think and what to do, or is there something else that these songs are being repurposed for now in the 21st century in the Republic that's different than it was in the past? And I say in the Republic because the meaning of these songs for me and the work that I've done is different, is qualitatively different in the North than it is in the South, where there was a 30-year-old armed conflict. How could it not be? But another thing, not to hog the mic but for too long, but another thing just to jump on the back of Martin's comments and the examples that he was using, what interests me is that, as you rightly point out, Martin, we know this stuff matters because of the reactions that the states have. NECAP can't travel to the US, even though they were there in some previous years. They now can't travel to the US because of their performance at Coachella and the imagery that they used at the back. But even though they can't travel and they can't perform in the US, the Strokes, when they performed at Coachella, they were using anti-genocide language and whatnot that was very similar to what NECAP were doing. So they've perhaps sort of lit something that's being carried out throughout different bands. But if I could add one more point onto that, is that there's the cynic in me wonders, why now? So NECAP suffered tremendously from taking that political position. And if you listen to the sort of the latest comments from the Strokes when they're being interviewed about it, they're saying, we felt we really had to say something and all the rest of it. This genocide's been going on for years, and these performers are way more lucrative and from lucrative families, incidentally, than a couple of working class boys from Belfast and Derry. So I'm interested in that. I'm interested about at what point do people choose to remember this and then choose to commemorate it. And it's a bit like Omar El Akkad's book, One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This. At what point are we going to see this shift whereby people are like, oh yeah, I was always against the genocide and whatnot, and they're sort of leaning into it. Whereas a few years ago, there was almost nobody doing it because it was very difficult, and you would lose potentially tremendously as a result of your conviction.
I'm minded by your comments of the importance of studying festive culture in these contexts as well. Of course, we can do media analysis online, but actually on the ground work at festivals is crucial, because those are the places, they're neoliberal spaces, but they're also ritual spaces. There's many other things happening. And on that point, in Ormston House downtown at the moment, there is an exhibition called Memory of a Festival. It's from one of the graduates of the MA in Ethnomusicology last year. Cayman Walsh curated it. He did his MA research with the Simon Dalby papers here in UL on the anti-nuclear movement in the 1970s in Ireland. And so that exhibition is an artistic and creative response to that. Christy Moore and all the protest singers that we know all feature in it, as he did his original research on it. So there's something in the air around this, most definitely. There's an acceleration of attention being paid to this, and we want to place UL and CSP at the centre of those kinds of interrogations, and we want to collaborate not just within our faculty, where, by the way, social justice and resilient democracies are two of our key themes. We also want to collaborate with people across other faculties, including KBS, anybody who's really interested in why these things matter, because they have all kinds of social outcomes. I'm conscious it's 11 o'clock. I'm very sorry I can't take any more questions, but thank you very much. Oh, 12 even. It's 11 somewhere else. Stephen Miller, thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you to Felix and Martin, and thank you very much to our tech crew and to Research Week for organising this and for having us yet once again. Thank you, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.